What's up, Met fans? It's time for episode 6 of Bleav in Queens. I'm Joe Serralo, as always, joined by my man Tyler Ward. We've got a lot to dive into. We are fresh off a series victory, not only against the Braves, but at the Braves, making it that much sweeter. We're going to be all over that. We're going to preview the upcoming 4-game set at Wrigley with the Chicago Cubs. That'll take us right into the All-Star break. This, of course, is our last show before the All-Star game. And we're going to dive into, of course, some trade deadline rumors. Not your typical July 31st deadline this year. It's August 2nd, but Sandy Alderson's already made some remarks about it, about where the Mets will be looking to get some help, to add some padding on this already stacked first place team in the National League East. I can't wait. Tyler, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm feeling electric, right? I just finished my recording for my post-game show that I usually do on WardyNYM. For people watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash that like and subscribe on. You know the drill, guys, and make sure to rate, review wherever you get your podcast. This is episode 6, and I think this is probably going to be the most pumped up one yet. And I don't know how it can be anything else. I'm so pumped. Let's get into this one, Joe. Take it away.
Let's do it. First, I do want to remind everyone that this show is brought to you by our proud sponsors over at BetOnline. Head over to betonline.ag. You can get your lines, your updates, your news, everything regarding betting on baseball, NFL futures, fighting, whatever you need, you can get it at BetOnline. And make sure to sign up with the promo code Bleav. That's BLEAV, Bleav. You can get your 50% welcome bonus over there. So head over to BetOnline and let the games begin.
All right, Joe, let's just talk about initial raw reactions, right? I know that we're going to go over each game from this series, but in a nutshell, we just came off of this high, winning 7-3, series W. You know, going into this series, we had, of course, hopes and aspirations that the Mets would come out with victories. When you look at no Marte, no McNeil, that ends up being no problem for this Mets team. So just give me your initial raw reaction to the Mets winning 2-3 here in Hotlanta, no less, against these hot Braves. Again, another situation where it's not a problem for this Mets team, and they continue to prove why they are the best team here in the NL East.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped. I feel like it's October right now. You know, this series, it really had a playoff atmosphere to it. You know, give Brave fans credit, man. They were loud. I think Atlanta had 2 sellouts. Not for
they showed out as they should. That was great to see.
Yeah, yep. You know, you win trophies, you hang banners, people show up. And so, you know, give them credit. They were there. They were loud. The first 2 games were great pitchers duels. And then, of course, today, the bats just took off. Fogo power from Escobar. Lindor with a 3-run piss missile. Mark Canha going deep to left. I mean, everything today was just the perfect game. It was the light day that Mets fans needed. You know, the last 2 days were at least 7 innings of stress, 9 innings of stress game 1. And then last night, the bullpen blew it. But we were right there neck and neck with them for about the first 7. Today was just easy watching. It was fun. Charlie Morton, you know, we talked about it last episode. The Mets have done really well against Charlie Morton, but over his last 5 or 6 starts this season, he's been as dominant as anyone in that Braves rotation. So I didn't know what to expect here. Were the Mets going to prevail against him again, or was Morton going to keep his hot streak going? Well, the Mets did the job. Chris Bassett showed that mental toughness that I was saying last episode. It looked like he'd been lacking throughout most of June and early July. Bassett went out there today, and I believe he made 1 mistake to Matt Olson, but outside of that, man, he looked really damn good. It was just a fun game.
It was an electric game, especially for the Mets to come out. And we know the trend with them. We've talked about a lot in previous pods. When the Mets score early and they score in the first, second, and third inning, they're not just a lock to score more often, but they're almost a sure lock to win that game. And that's what happened here for the Mets. They scored early in this one, and it was just an absolute blast to see the Mets tack on early runs here against this Braves team. After the first 2 games in the series that we'll be getting into here shortly, they were pitchers' duels in a lot of ways. You know, even though that, yes, the Mets thankfully entered this series where you're facing Max Fried, you're facing Spencer Strider, the young flamethrower, and you're facing Charlie Morton, the 3 arguably hottest pitchers right now for the Braves in this rotation. None of them go past 5 innings, which was a huge accomplishment in itself. But to see 47 strikeouts from both teams combined through the first 2 games, right? It was by no means one that you're looking at, oh, this is going to be, in fact, a hitter's duel. No, it was a pitcher's duel. So the Mets to come out to jump on Morton, just like what they did in their first matchup in the series split earlier in this year, was absolutely huge. They got on Morton, and they got on often. They scored 5 earned runs, and the 4 to 5 innings that he pitched was absolutely electric. I'm so proud of this Mets team to jump out the way that they did, and especially here in Game 3, and then we'll go back to Game 2 and originally Game 1. the Mets beat the Braves at their own game. The Braves did not score one measly run this entire series without the home run ball. They're the best home run hitting team in all the NL. They also lead the NL in strikeouts for a reason versus a Mets club that normally has their issues with the home run ball. However, when they score, they get themselves 3 absolute bombs in this one, thanks to, as you said already, Eduardo Escobar, Mark Hanna, Francisco Lindor, who I have so much to say about. Talk about stepping up, especially with the likes of Marte and McNeil out of the lab. He's earning his money in big series like this. So shout out Francisco, Mr. Smile. But I'm just so taken back by the Mets jumping on Morton, especially jumping on the bullpen a little bit too, that we saw with some bad defensive errors on their front. But overall, huge win, 7-3 in this game 3. So before we get on to game 2, that loss, and originally game 1, that was really setting the tone for this series. What was your biggest takeaway from this game 3? Because in my personal opinion, Joe, outside of Seabass, again, looking absolutely strong for the Mets here, giving the Mets 6 strong, only 1 earned run. He had that one mistake. He threw a changeup that was right down the pipe, unfortunately, to Olsen. But I got to give credit to Bassett. He did not even have his best stuff, in my opinion, today. There were a lot of haters because he wasn't utilizing the fastball. Fastball was like the 4th or 5th on his 6-pitch mix of the amount of times he utilized it in today's win. And he knew that because the Braves are so good against fastballs, not so much against off speed. But they were really swinging and missing regardless. So besides that mistake, he looked like a stud. 6 innings, only 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts on 99 pitches. But I got to go with Francisco Lindor. And this really goes in hand with him the entire series. I mean, Pete Alonso, we'll get to him in game 1, but he really labored in this one. Struck out 3 times in game 3. Struck out numerous times in this series. Wasn't looking too pretty with his at-bats. But Lindor, even though he went 1 for 5 today, or 1 for 5, just making sure that's correct. It is. 2 runs scored, the 3-run bomb. I mean, it's really hard for me not to choose someone like him, the way that he stepped up both at the plate and defensively in this game 3 and the overall series.
No, Lindor was definitely the X factor on offense. And I know you mentioned he was just 1 for 5. Well, that one was a big one, but also on the series, 5 for 14. I mean, that's better than a 333 clip. So Lindor had a really good series, tacked on 4 RBI to that 5 for 14 total. But when you look at the difference in this one, both teams had 3 home runs. What it comes down to is that the Mets style of offense, getting hits, making contact, getting on base. You know, the Mets, I Bleav, have the 4th lowest K rate in baseball, whereas Atlanta has the 2nd highest K rate in the majors, only behind the Angels. So that's the highest in the National League for the Braves. That works, right? That's how the Royals beat us in 2015. The Royals didn't strike out. They put the ball in play better than any other team in baseball. The Mets back in 2015 were an all-or-nothing team. You had Murphy hitting home runs like nobody's business in the postseason. Cespedes was all or nothing. That was the Mets in 2015. Well, now you're seeing a bit of a role reversal, right? This team doesn't have crazy home run numbers outside of Alonso, but they put the ball in play. Atlanta's 3 home runs, all solo shots because they weren't able to accumulate base runners. They weren't able to put together a string of hits. When the Mets put together a string of hits, a blast like Lindor's knocked in 3 as opposed to Atlanta's blasts all being solo shots. So even with each team knocking 3 balls out of the park apiece, the Mets' ability to get on base and put rallies together and just consistently put the ball in play and not be all or nothing like Atlanta, that was the ultimate difference maker in today's game.
It was, and it was so beautiful to see again the Mets really take the Braves playbook with the home runs, but at the same time know how to manage to get guys on, because the Mets did a really strong job, especially against Morton here in game 3, by grinding out at bats. We've seen Nimmo do it time and time again, but we saw some others as well. I was really impressed with the Mets and their ability, and someone that I thought was a huge X factor that should not get slept on in the slightest. Normally he's known for his wizardry in the infield with that defense, but batting cleanup today is Luis Gourmet. Goes 1 for 4 with the RBI double, opposite field down the third baseline. I mean, I'm not even surprised at this point. I'm really surprised when Gourmet's going over, because he's just that clutch for this team. But
well, 2 things about Guillorme, man. I mean, look, first off, we're 1-0 when Guillorme's our cleanup hitter. So, take that rolling to the bank. I saw that today. I saw him hitting cleanup, and I had like PTSD to early in 2015 when we had Eric Campbell hitting cleanup.
Oh, no.
John Mayberry hitting cleanup. I was like, oh my God, Luis Guillorme's hitting cleanup. We're 1-0 when he does, baby. But also, you mentioned his Oppo Taco RBI double. Luis Guillorme, in a day and age where, and I was actually just having a conversation with someone from Bleav earlier today about banning the shift. And I was saying, I don't know if I love banning it, because the thought of telling, grown men, professional athletes, like, oh, you can't stand there just doesn't sound right to me.
I
But what I
100%
told him
agree.
was, I'd like to see more of these athletes go opposite field and then naturally watch the shift fade away. Tyler, make no mistake about it. He's not the best hitter in the world. I think hitting about 300 where he's at right now is better than the actual hitter he is. But Luis Guillorme goes opposite field better than anyone or as good as anyone in Major League Baseball. The Mets happen to have two of the best opposite field hitting lefties in the league in McNeil when he's out there and Luis Guillorme. So Guillorme just putting his skill set, on full display. And, the guy, he doesn't strike out. He goes deep in at-bats. You remember in spring training, I think it's 2, maybe even 3 years ago by now, what did he have, like a 17-pitch at-bat?
Oh, like over 20, and it was against Jordan Hicks. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, Guillorme doesn't strike out. And, Brandon Nimmo, you touched on him too. He set the tone yesterday, even though the Mets lost. And, Spencer Strider looked good. He had the K numbers. Strider was out of there in 5 innings. He wasn't able to go deep against us because Nimmo set the tone with a 10-pitch at-bat to start the game off. So, it's guys like Nimmo, guys like Guillorme. They don't have the pop that Lindor, Alonso, Marte have. But, man, you can really set the tone when you make a pitcher exhaust himself and go deep 8, 9, 10 pitches into a count. And then a little, base hit opposite field in Guillorme's case today. It's like these guys, they just know how to keep the line moving, man. And that's why it's so much more effective. This team has power, right? Maybe not as much as the Braves, but they have power. But it's so much more effective when you just keep the line moving. You get a couple bloops or a couple ropes, and then you get the blast. That's how you beat a team like Atlanta.
And not just in the way that they were getting those bloops and ropes to then the home run, but continuing to grind out those at-bats, right? And as you mentioned, game 2, let's shift here for a minute, game 2. We'll wrap things up on the series going back to game 3 and enjoying this high. But the lone loss that we saw there, this was another pitching duel right after game 1. You saw Spencer Strider, again, did not have his best stuff. So I will give the Mets full credit here. Look, even though the offense was anemic and I expected it to be better, and it did show up here in game 3 against Morton, you saw Strider, he only went 4.2 innings, but he did have 8 strikeouts. Again, when you got that fastball easily touching 97 to 99 and a nasty slider, it's going to do some damage to this Mets team that has struggled at times, especially against guys that they don't have great backgrounds on. That's been the case, and that was again. However, one of the biggest takeaways here in game 2 for me personally was really what was a phenomenal start that just fell short, that we can truly blame in part the umpires. I know the umps definitely benefited the Mets early on in this one. There were so many blown calls left and right, and David Pearson ends up with his final line being 5.1 innings pitched, 2 earned runs, 3 walks, 9 strikeouts, that lone home run to Matt Olson that blew the doors open from the Mets originally having themselves a lead early in this one, 1-0 that they got the first run of the game there in the 5th inning, thanks to that lone RBI triple from Francisco Lindor that Ronald Acuna Jr. just did not read well defensively. But then you see there in the 6th, that 2-run shot by Olson. It was a fastball a little up high that just was right down the plate. However, how did we get there, right? Because Pearson was absolutely shoving. And this is something that I'm pretty sure you're aware of. We've seen a lot in his recent start. He is working quickly. He's working faster than I feel Peterson has to begin this season. He's really comfortable there on the mound right now. He's been a blessing in disguise for this Mets team. And when you look at the stat line, you might not think it's perfect, but really, Pearson was doing exactly what I expected him to do against a Braves lineup that struck out a boatload against Scherzer and has struggled mightily at times against lefties, especially a guy like Pearson that can utilize that slider down and in. I mean, it's definitely brutal for those righty hitters. We saw that in display. The lefties down away too. It was a thing of beauty, but you saw there in the 6th, and I know, again, don't get me wrong, there was a strikeout on Arcia earlier in this one that really was a questionable call that went Pearson the Mets' way. There were some questionable calls that were borderline paint out of the zone. However, the biggest and the most crucial blown call of the game, and it's not even a debate, all Braves fans watching it will tell you the exact same thing. Dansby Swanson, who did absolutely nothing this series. He went 0 for 9. Talk about the best shortstops in the NL. I'm taking Francisco Lindor right now. I'm sorry. I got to be honest with you here after how he stepped up in this one. Swanson, he gets a slider that should have easily been strike 3. It was beautifully painted inside corner there. It's called a complete ball. And because of that reason, it leads to a walk. Matt Olson then grinds out at bat and takes a dead center 2-run shot to end David Pearson's night. But I want to know what your initial reaction was to not only that at bat, that inning overall, how it transpired, but David Pearson in a nutshell, because I was unbelievably impressed by him. And I really hope that Mets fans realize that David is making a great argument to continue to stay in this rotation until proven otherwise.
Yeah, honestly, the way Peterson's been pitching, Tyler, it's like you look at our needs, and we're going to get into the trade deadline in a little bit shortly on this show, but starting pitcher is no longer a pressing need in my opinion, because David Peterson has pitched his way into this rotation. Now, can you always use depth? Absolutely. You never know if and when a guy is going to go down, who the next guy to get injured is going to be. So if the Mets want to go out and get a starter, please be my guest. But right now, bullpen help and another bat, they're way more pressing than starting pitching. And David Peterson is a huge reason for that. He's been just as good and just as reliable as anyone in this rotation. The only knock on him is that typically he doesn't go as deep into games as some of the other guys we have. Walker's given us 7 strong multiple times. Scherzer, you expect to go at least 7 every outing, right? Peterson sometimes is in that 5 to 6 inning range. In fact, most times he is. But when he's out there, he's been as good as anyone. If you're into gambling, I've been eyeing his strikeout props. I think, Tyler, you took that as part of a same game parlay,
yes,
right?
Yes, I did.
And Peterson shattered what he was expected to record, right? If it's coming in 4.5, 5.5, this is a guy who in about 5 straight starts has gone for 7 or more Ks, including a couple 9, 10K performances. He's been dominant. Now, as far as that call to Swanson, it stinks. The umpire was not good. He was not good for either side. This just happened to be probably the most blatant, obvious missed call of the game. What I will say about that Olsen at-bat that followed, though, I was almost expecting Buck to do the same thing he did in Los Angeles during that at-bat. Do you remember Peterson's start against the Dodgers? Went 4 2/3, so he didn't get the win. But he was facing Mookie in the bottom of the fifth. Bases were loaded. And after Betts ripped a foul ball, Buck took him out mid-at-bat.
He didn't even hesitate.
Never see. Didn't hesitate. And I think he brought in Holderman, who then went on to strike out Betts. I was kind of expecting the same thing. Now, maybe no one was ready, and that's why he didn't do it. But I thought, after Olsen ripped a foul ball off Peterson, I think he just got ahead of one that would have been, gone.
Yeah, to the right side. Yep.
Yeah, after that, I was like, ooh, maybe it's the time to take Peterson out right now because Olsen was playing chippy. I think he had 5 at-bats and 5 strikeouts in the series prior to that home run.
Yes, he
did.
So
it was like, all right, maybe it's time. Maybe we've unleashed the beast in Olsen a little bit. Maybe get Peterson out there. He left him in. He paid the price. But don't let that take away from what was an absolutely incredible, superb start yet again from David Peterson. In fact, I would argue, even though he ended up being the losing pitcher in this one, right? I would argue that David Peterson outpitched Spencer Strider. I think he was. Agree. First off, Strider failed to go 5 innings. Strider left. The Mets were winning in the game. I think Peterson definitely outpitched Strider. So when you look at this series from a macro level, all 3 games, Mets starters outpitched Braves starters every single game this series. There's something colossal to be said for that when no DeGrom and the Braves have had the arguably hottest rotation in baseball for the last 6 weeks.
Oh, absolutely. And the Mets starters in particular went right around for a 1.96 ERA total in this series. What did the Braves do? Had a just sub 5 ERA. But then we see the differences, however, and I'm curious to want to know your stance because we saw in game 3, Drew Smith, who we didn't talk about much yet. I thought he looked brilliant. I know he gave up that home run to Austin Riley.
That's what he does, though.
Who doesn't give up home runs to Austin Riley, right? There's a reason why he's on pace right now for easily 40-plus bombs on the season. Drew, even though he struggled with the home run ball, easily struck out 5 crucial batters in 2 innings that he faced against that Braves lineup. So I was impressed. Tommy Hunter gave up that bomb to Eddie Rosario in game 3, but Rosario already had 2 extra base hits entering that at bat. He had the hot hand there. It didn't change anything. The Mets still got the victory without problem. But there is one reliever, once again, that we find ourselves having a discussion with, being inconsistent. And at this point, Joe, I do not know how you justify whatsoever putting this man in any high leverage situation. And that is Seth Lugo. Lugo came in, of course, in game 2 for David Peterson, got a couple strikeouts, which was awesome. We love that. But then after that, we advanced to the following inning, and Seth Lugo just can't get out of his own way. Once again, gives up a couple earned runs because he gives up a single or a walk, I believe. Then an absolute tank there. And just like that, this game goes from being a 1-run ball game to a 4-1 ball game. So Seth Lugo with a sub 4 ERA now on the year. This man has been so Jekyll and Hyde for the Mets all year long. I'm to the point where I can't even stand the idea of having Seth Lugo in any high leverage situation, especially in a 1-run or tied ball game. You cannot justify it right now. Call up Adonis Medina. Make something happen. I need better options than Lugo right now. It's that piss poor from what we're seeing. And at this juncture, I don't think you give Lugo any time should he stay in the bullpen. If he is, then he gets garbage time. That is the only type of time we should be seeing Lugo get. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe.
No, Tyler, I hate to say it. He hasn't even, the one thing you're wrong about is that he hasn't been Jekyll and Hyde. He's been consistent, but he's been consistently bad.
Fair.
There is no on and off. There is no, oh, are we going to get lights out Lugo? No, he's just been bad and unreliable all year long. And I hate to say it because, it's like when you look at Seth Lugo and you look at Seth Lugo of the past out of the bullpen, this is a guy who, if you needed a 4 or 5 out situation, was so reliable not only to shut things down in the inning he came into the ball game mid-inning, but also to go out the next inning and be just as dominant. And this year, he has struggled so mightily in the back end of those performances. He was fine coming out of the pen. He was great locking things down after Peterson got pulled. But then in that next inning, when he goes back out there, something about him this season, he just loses it. And we saw another case of it last night. It's funny. I was thinking today, you mentioned garbage time, right? When we were up 7-1, I was like, oh, this is the time Seth Lugo should be pitching. If he didn't pitch last night, I'd rather have Lugo go out there for the final 3 innings today.
1,000% agree with you.
And save the rest of our bullpen. Because I'd rather see, obviously, Edwin Diaz, but I'd rather see Adam Ottavino. I'd rather see Drew Smith, even though he can be a little shaky himself. I'd rather see Holderman, to your point. I'd rather see Medina. There's about 4 to 5 guys, maybe even Tommy Hunter included, that I'd rather see right now in a high leverage situation than Seth Lugo. And it truly breaks my heart because I've loved Seth Lugo since he joined the team in 2016. I really feel strongly about Seth Lugo and appreciate on some bad Mets teams what he provided from a versatility perspective, whether we needed him to be the closer, whether we needed him to be the 8th inning guy, to be a starter, a long guy. Lugo did it all for the Mets. He did it all without question, and he did it all really damn well. So yes, the fan in me really feels strongly about Seth Lugo, and I hate to see this. I don't want to DFA him. I don't want to cut him. Maybe he needs an IL stint. Maybe he needs, I don't know. I don't think he's got any options, but maybe he needs a quote-unquote rehab stint, a BSIL, say he's got a dead arm or something, and then have him rehab in the minors and work some kinks out. Because right now, he's bad and he's a liability to this team coming out of the pen in a tight game. Right now, Seth Lugo doesn't belong pitching in any situation outside of a blowout on either side.
And the thing is, it's not like the Mets don't have options. Say there is a blowout situation. That's why they have now back to the pen Trevor Williams, who's supposed to be that innings eater. Say they are down by multiple runs early in a game. So it's not even like you need a Lugo for that opportunity. If anything, I'm feeling a little at risk of, okay, maybe Lugo's going to make this a closer game than it needs to be. Like, that's just how inconsistent he's been. And it really is going to be curious how the Mets operate this bullpen that we'll be discussing shortly leading to the trade deadline, because I don't even think it would be the most impossible thing to come out with a statement and say that maybe the Mets do consider parting ways with Seth Lugo to a team that can benefit them more right now than what the Mets can, especially in non-contender.
That would break my heart. That would break my heart.
It would break your heart. It would break your heart. But you know what? Something I learned as a Michael Conforto lover, you got to put emotions aside in the baseball biz, right?
Look, 100%. I mean, look, if it was time to make the playoff roster tomorrow and everyone's healthy, McGill is back and available out of the bullpen, and Holderman and Medina are options. Like, Lugo's the odd man out, right? If your objective is purely and solely to go out and win games in a playoff situation, I don't see a spot for Lugo on this team. And so that's why, I propose that idea of a BSIL stint, right? Because we've seen it before. You can say he's got a dead arm because he doesn't have any minor league options on his contract. So you can say he's got a dead arm, send him down on a quote unquote rehab assignment and have him work through some things, because things definitely need to be worked through. I mean, his breaking ball is not as consistently sharp. He'll throw 2 stellars and then he'll throw a flat one. His fastball is coming in on a tee. I mean, there's something seriously wrong with Seth Lugo, and I want him to figure it out. I don't want this to be the end, but
Absolutely.
right now, if we have a healthy roster to choose from, he's not one of our 7 best relievers. And that's absolutely wild to say, because this guy, for the better part of his tenure as a Met, I mentioned he's done it all from starting, long relief, closing. But I mean, he's been probably, our most consistent, dominant 8th inning guy for the better part of his tenure as a Met. And right now, I don't want him in the 5th inning. I don't want him in the 6th inning. It's really sad. Something needs to be fixed. Or, to your point, it may be time to move on.
And going from a sad note, let's wrap things up on this series with a positive note. And this is how this series began, right? You had a big pitching duel, the battle of the Maxes, right? You got Max Fried in one side, you got Max Scherzer on the other. And thankfully, one Max truly prevailed. And it really wasn't all that close, because Max Fried entered this game and did not have his stuff. He was behind in almost all of his counts, looked a little erratic there. Something that I was beyond perplexed to see transpire. You're telling me Max Fried, one of the best southpaws in all the NL, is struggling with his command consistently with a Mets lineup that in the bottom half, you have no Marte, you have no McNeil. I mean, it was surprising to me. It really was. However, Fried definitely pressed. He only won 5 innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs, but he had 5 walks for a guy that's averaging just over a walk per 9. 5 strikeouts total. What did Max Scherzer do? He just casually had another phenomenal start for the Mets. Oh, you thought it was impressive enough in Cincinnati with 11 strikeouts? Oh, it's Cincy. Not a big deal. No, he enters Hotlanta, a team that has around a 4-year reign on him in his career and has one of his best starts against the Atlanta Braves. 7 strong, 3 hits, 1 earned run they gave up, which the Mets got right back the following inning, thanks to Luis Gourmet, no less. We'll get into in a minute. But 9 strikeouts, 2.15 ERA. Mad Max has broken records. He now has the highest strikeout rate, if I'm not mistaken, through his first 10 starts as a Met in Mets history now. He surpassed Doc Gooden for his strikeout rate. I think it's 33%, if I'm not mistaken. And Doc's was right around 32. So talk about immediate impact. And this was something that everyone was tweeting about, and I agree. You can rightfully argue that even now, 10 starts in, Max Scherzer is easily the most effective and impactful free agent signing the Mets have had from the jump. I mean, if you look at their history, it's really hard to argue what Max has done in this short period of a time, no less.
Yeah, man, there's no doubt about it. Look, Scherzer coming off the IL, and I know that the Mets lost, ironically, that gem he pitched at Cincinnati, 1-0. But the second Scherzer rejoined the team, they just gained a moxie that they didn't have, a swag that this team really hadn't had for the better part of 6 weeks. The second Scherzer came back, and it's not just him pitching, it's him being on the bench. It's his fiery, borderline crazy competitiveness rubbing off on the guys around him. It's him being a role model for the younger guys, the David Petersons, the Tyler McGills. You heard, if you were watching the SNY broadcast, which, by the way, I don't know if we've brought them up. This is episode 6 of Bleav in Queens. And I don't know if we've talked about Gary, Keith, and Ron at all yet, outside of Keith's ceremony when we touched on that last episode. Mm-hmm. I mean, our booth is just, and this is common knowledge among Met fans, they're the best. This series, and I know Ron didn't go down to Atlanta, and now Keith isn't going to go to Chicago for the weekend. But this series, just listening to Gary and Keith, I watched this probably more intently, more closely than I've watched an entire 3-game series in a while.
As you should.
Because of the implications, because this was a playoff series. And just listening to Gary and Keith every night, I mean, from Keith's line about his 2 ex-wives to, just to their baseball knowledge. And Keith even talking about pitching because Ron wasn't there. I mean, make no mistake about it. Keith Hernandez, not only is he the best fielding first baseman of all time, not only was he one of the best gap-to-gap contact hitters of his generation, Keith Hernandez can talk pitching with the best of them. And he gets overshadowed because Darling, as great as Keith is an even better analyst. But, I mean, Keith, really, what he was saying about Scherzer and guys like McGill, who I can't wait to have back, realizing that like Mad Max, like Justin Verlander, he may have to not throw 99 in the first, save a little in the tank in order to stay healthy, go deeper into games, right? Having Scherzer there, just it gives everyone else on this team more confidence. I believe it makes them more locked in because Max is, I mean, make no mistake about it, man. Max Scherzer is like a player coach. He's our best pitcher at the moment with no DeGrom, and he is practically the assistant manager to Buck Showalter. So just having his presence, even though he only plays once every 5th day, having his presence, having him in the dugout and around these guys makes everyone from other pitchers to position players on this team more confident, and I think it just makes them better. Having him back is so huge. Max Fried's a great pitcher, but it was like teacher versus apprentice in this game. I mean, it wasn't even – there was no question. And, one's an all-star, and it ain't Scherzer, obviously, because he missed 6 weeks. But there was no question as to who the better pitcher was and who the better pitcher is in Game 1.
Beautifully said from, the apprentice, to the teacher. I mean, that was just perfect because Max, what he has been able to do, again, in such a short period of time, let's not forget, this man's like 37, 38 years old. Yet he has far and away the most energy out on the field every single time he's on the bump. That's something that will always blow my mind. And it further proves how much of an anomaly of a player Max Scherzer is. This is why, again, we say it all the time, and we will, the same way we will say with Jake when he's eventually back in this rotation that we'll talk about here in a minute. However, Max, you know what you're getting with a future Hall of Famer. His mentality, his attitude is bar none the best out there. And to have him this locked in, you have the team locked in behind him as well. And that's why I told you in our last podcast, This was the most important game. Max is the closest thing to a lock of a victory the Mets will ever get from these starters not named Jacob deGrom. And I can't even say Jake because it's not like the Mets have had a stellar past of giving him run support. But regardless, going back to Max's, to get the runs, especially for Max early on, they got a couple there in the third inning. That had to feel great for Max, who, again, did not get one measly run on his side in Cincinnati. I can only imagine how much more comfortable he felt early on in his start knowing, oh, I have a multi-run lead. Oh, I'm going nuts with this one. Like, there's no holding back now. I'm going to just do whatever the hell I want to do, and I'm going to strike out these Braves hitters left and right. That's exactly what he did. That led him to giving up that home run there in the 7th to Austin Riley, but thankfully that wouldn't even matter because you would see the Mets get that run right back and in total win this game 4-1. In part, Luis Gourmet, again, what a stud he is, getting himself his second bomb against Darren O'Day once they get the bullpen in. How hilarious is this? Luis Gourmet only has a couple home runs in his career, and the field 4, and half of them are to Darren O'Day. You would think that Snicker understood the playbook. I guess he didn't because he had O'Day in for that matchup. Wild. And Gourmet takes him deep to the right side. I want to know, Joe, what was your initial reaction to that? Because I had my pen in my hand. I pulled a Gary. I flipped my pen. I lost my marbles. What a bomb that was.
Yeah, same reaction anytime Guillorme goes deep. Holy shit, that just happened? Yeah. I mean, this guy, we talked about it before, right? He doesn't strike out, which in today's age, everyone does, and they strike out at astronomical, disgusting rates, right? Guillorme's old school. He doesn't strike out, plays great defense, goes opposite field well. He's even hitting over 290 this season, right? But the one thing he doesn't do is hit home runs. So when he hit that, I was like, wow, it really is our night. But it's funny because as great as winning game 1 felt, and I know you and I were talking obviously during and after the game, and we were thrilled and excited, I still had a knot in my stomach because I was still like, the Mets can easily, with the pitching matchups, go and lose the next 2. So this was a huge victory, but it's far from over. You can't squander the series. I mean, I'm so much more relaxed sitting here today after game 3, knowing that we went to Atlanta, we won the series. I mean, it feels so great. This was such a stressful last 3 to 4 days. Just being completely honest, like Braves fans were talking their shit and they were cocky and confident, best team in the National League since June 1st. Obviously, they had that 14-game win streak to start the month of June, and they were doubting the Mets. And there was a chance if the Braves won this series that, the Mets, depending on obviously the weekend to come, could potentially be out of first place going into the All-Star break. The Mets, who were 10 games up at the beginning of May. But right now, this is such a great feeling to know that we went to Atlanta with no Jeff McNeil, with no Starling Marte. Not even going to say no DeGrom because, even when DeGrom's healthy, it's a 3-game series. There's always a chance he doesn't pitch, right? He's not lined up. So not even going to say that. But no McNeil, no Marte, and we just laid 7 on one of the hottest pitchers in the National League. I mean, Braves fans, it's like, who are you going to blame today on? The wind again? The umpiring? The umpiring screwed us game 2, so I don't want to hear anything about game 1. Like, what are you gonna blame this on, guys? I mean, really, just what a whiny fan base. I'm sorry. I hate the Phillies, hate them with a passion. The Braves still, and maybe it's because I grew up watching, the Joneses, Chipper and Andrew, and Smoltzy and Glavine and Maddox terrorize the Mets. The Braves are probably my least favorite fan base. Just because of all the years of winning. Philly had that one little hot streak of a couple of years in a row when the Mets blew their lead. But Braves fans doing a lot of crying right now and a lot of excuse making. And we just beat you guys fully healthy, playing hot as hell. We just beat you guys undermanned, understaffed, and I'm here for all the smoke, man. This is the Mets division. I love it. Why don't we get on to the Cubs?
Why don't we get on to the Cubs as well? But one final thing I would just like to make a note about this series, and this was going back to how you felt originally so stressed to then feeling calm. Who else was calm, cool, and collected? That was Edwin Diaz when he went in there in the ninth. Let's just appreciate for one more minute. Edwin comes in for a 3rd consecutive game, and he strikes out the side with ease. I mean,
how great was that shutting up the Braves too?
It was
Who
on
was
Cano.
That towards?
It was on Cano because he's friends with Cano. So he was looking at Cano, and it was kind of he was like keep that mouth shut basically. Okay. But yeah, no, Diaz just simply unhittable still. I mean, he's looked more locked in, better and better with every single time he's out there. Struck out every single batter with the slider that he had. He had the slider going down away. Then he had the back foot slider as well for the final strikeout, which I think was on Ozuna. Could be wrong. It might have been Acuna. I don't really know. All I do know is that literally every time Diaz is out there, I'm the most comfortable I've ever been. We talked about it last pod, and I will say it again. this man deserves all the credit in the world. That he is pitching quite literally as the best reliever in baseball, and that is not an outlandish comment to make in the slightest.
No, I mean, and Josh Hader, he gave up a walk-off bomb today to Minnesota, 3-run walk-off.
Not my closer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Diaz would never. It's wild to say that now after what we saw when he first got to Queens. But yeah, man, Edwin Diaz, I'm like you, man. When he enters the game, the first 8 innings, I might be, on the edge of my seat leaning forward. When Diaz comes in, I'm kicking my feet up. I'm enjoying life. It's so nice. By the way, and I know we're going to get to the Cubs right now, but real quick, while we're recording this, it's 6:20 p.m. Wednesday the 13th on the East Coast at this exact timestamp, 3:20 for me over here in LA. And I'm watching I got the Giants D-backs on in the background. Wilmer Flores just hit his 8th career pinch hit home run to tie the game.
My night just got a little bit better.
What was that?
My night just got a little bit better. Thank you for playing me
I had to mention that. I'm not really a Flores lover like so many Met fans are, but I know that a lot of our audience is going to appreciate hearing that and just hearing the name. And he did it off a guy who the Mets might be shopping around for, Joe Mantiply of Arizona. Just blew the save. Yeah, Mantiply, who had an ERA of like 1, who's going to the All-Star game. Flores, he always hit lefties way better than he hit righties. And San Fran was down 3-0 an inning ago. They just tied it at 3 thanks to Wilmer. So let's get into the Cubs, man. We got a 4-game set leading into the All-Star break. There's not going to be an episode between this the conclusion of this series and the All-Star game. We'll be back after the All-Star game. So this 4-game set's coming up. We're going to see an old friend, now foe, and Marcus Stroman. He's done his fair share of talking.
I got a lot to say about Stro, but we'll get to him.
I always rooted for him. I always defended him when he was on the Mets. Since leaving, I don't have much for the guy anymore. I want to lay one on him Friday. It's going to be Taijuan Walker, Marcus Stroman. The two of them are good friends, the two ex-teammates. So that's going to be a fun pitching matchup to watch, especially fun if the Mets lay one on Stro. I'm saying, anything less. I could live with the Marlins split from last weekend. In this one, anything less than 3 out of 4, I'm not happy with.
1,000%. The Mets just took 2 or 3 from one of the hottest teams in baseball right now in the Braves. They have to, at minimum, win 3 or 4 here in Chicago. And no, we're not going to make the argument that because the Braves lost their series, coincidentally enough, in Chicago last time they faced the Cubs. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Mets right now, how they're facing a team that's 20 games under 500. They need to take full advantage. The first game, which is this Thursday, at the time you guys listening or watching this more than likely, you have Cookie Carrasco on the bump looking for his 10th win of the season. 9-4 on the year with a 4.5 ERA. Matching up against Thompson, who's been a blessing in disguise this year in the rotation, dealing with a lot of injuries for the Cubs. The Southpaw 7-3 with a 3 ERA, looking really rock solid. Very interested to see how the Mets will match up against this rotation where they do not have too much extended experience with, and with some of these relievers too. But game 2, again, this is the highlight for sure. This Friday, as you said, Ty is coming off of another beautiful start for the Mets, 7-2 with a 2.63 ERA. Facing off Marcus Stroman, the man, again, we won't deep dive too much because I can go on an hour just talking about Marcus Stroman itself. More negative than positive, unfortunately. I defended him just like you. Was one of my favorite players growing up. Enjoyed his time with the Mets, but as things spiraled downward in the offseason, perspectives definitely tend to change. 2-5 with a 4.91 ERA. Stroh's coming off of an injury, so we'll see how he'll do. However, a couple things to make note for Marcus Stroman. If you quickly look through his numbers in Baseball Savant, what will they tell you is that he's one of the worst starters in all baseball this season. He is in the low percentiles in a lot of the major categories that define a starting pitcher this season. At home in 4 starts, has just under a 10 ERA. So, I mean, if I'm liking the Mets' chances of jumping on Marcus Stroman, you have to feel good, especially here in Chicago at Wrigley, where things are not benefiting him whatsoever. Massive matchup. That is my game to watch by far in this series. Friends, again, now foes against each other. It's going to be an electric matchup. We'll see if Stroh has a little bit more of a pep in his step against his former team, or the Mets completely jump on him, knowing that they have a strong playbook on the former Mets right-hander. Game 3, we have Mad Max on the bump, 6-1 with a 2.15 ERA, facing off against Drew Smiley. The Mets know him pretty well. He's a veteran in the league. 4.43 ERA there on this season for Smiley. Game 4, an interesting matchup to David Pearson. I'm excited to see David. I mean, I've been more giddy watching David every single time he's on the bump. I got to be honest. I have more of an interest than I really ever have been before with how much he has solidified himself of recent starts in this rotation, and in large part throughout the year. Pearson 5-2 with a 3.48 ERA, facing off against Sampson, who's 0-1 with a 3.33 ERA. So when looking at these pitching matchups alone, would you agree that's pretty much Taijuan Walker, Marcus Stroman that has the game?
That's the game to look at, not because Stroman's having some phenomenal season, but just because of all the behind the scenes implications.
Yeah.
Look, if anything, if the Mets are going to only win 3 out of 4, and I really want to go for, the cutthroat sweep here, but I think Thursday is probably the game that the Mets have their best chance at losing in this series. When you rattle off Walker, Scherzer, and DP back to back to back, it's like, wow, against the Cubs, that could really bode well for the Mets. So if you win game one, all of a sudden, eyes are on the sweep. But yeah, Walker, Stroman, this is the game to look at. I'm glad you mentioned the ERA at home being nearly 10. It's 9.33, 18 and a third innings pitched at Wrigley over 4 starts, 19 earned runs allowed. He's allowed 8 home runs on the year. 6 of them have come at Wrigley. It's you got to tattoo him. You got to tattoo him. It seems like both of us really defended Stroman. When the Mets traded for him, I was ecstatic. I was thrilled.
Pumped up. Look, I'm 5'5". Okay, so I love my short kings out
short
there.
Kings.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're 5'5".
Yeah. Just wait till you meet me.
I'm 6'4", right?
Yeah, I know.
I can't wait for us to meet.
When we do like a podcast photo, you're gonna have to have like your arm like on my head, like leaning. It's gonna have to be like that. Yeah,
I want to pitch to you though, just because you got that small strike zone to your
head. Yeah, good luck hitting it.
Yeah. That's funny. But yeah, I was ecstatic, right? Stroman, he's got all of his New York ties. He's a Long Island kid, and the thought of him and Steven Matz, the 2 Long Island kids, I was really looking forward. I wanted Stroman on this team a long time before the Mets actually went out and got him. And when he got here, look, he's an outspoken guy, and I'm 100% in favor of that. I'm okay with that as long as your play's backing it up. Have your opinions, talk your shit. I could not disagree anymore with the stick to sports crowd. I was always in Stroman's corner, always defending him. And then he leaves the Mets and, he enters free agency and he starts talking crap about the Mets. And it's like, man, so many people over here defended you when other people, were gunning for you or other people were calling you out. I felt like New York embraced Stroman well. And I just thought it was pretty distasteful the way he started talking negatively about the Mets once he left. And so now with Stroman, it's like, you know what, dude, good riddance. I appreciate that last year, in a very unstable year, he was one of our most consistent pitchers, pitched to an ERA of barely above 3, 8 innings. I can appreciate all that. But once you leave on good terms, man. Don't start talking bad about this organization that took you when a lot of other organizations didn't want you. So you know what? Now enjoy your 5 ERA with the Cubs. Taijuan Walker, hopefully, is an injury replacement because he was snubbed from the original All-Star team. Hopefully, he'll be making his 2nd straight All-Star appearance as a Met, something Stroman never did. And I think Walker is going to outpitch the hell out of him on Friday. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to tack on anything. I've talked extensively about Stroman, especially in the offseason on my channel, and it just isn't worth it anymore. I just hope the Mets jump on him, do what they're expected to do.
Do it on the field.
And we move on from there, right? But a couple more things about this Cubs series before we get on to our final segment of today's show. There's a couple guys to watch, and I think this will be a fun series for the Mets, not just having a 4-game set against a bottom feeder that they absolutely need to take advantage of, but now they can get a further playbook on some guys that very well the Mets can be pursuing if they haven't already started pursue leading up to this year's trade deadline. And it starts with the likes of Wilson Contreras. Now, again, we know the story with Wilson. He's one of the best catchers in baseball right now, and he will not come cheap even as a rental. There's no denying, however, that he would be an amazing fit for the Mets if they could get something done. He has 13 bombs, 35 RBIs, just under 270 average, and over 860 OPS on the year for the right-handed bat. Ian Happ is another one that is potentially expected to be dealt. He's been in a lot of rumors. The team across town in the Bronx, the Yanks, have been linked to Ian Happ earlier this year. And you look at Happ, he has 9 bombs, 41 home runs for the switching outfielder, and can play the infield at just under 280 average and an 820 OPS. And the big thing, another guy that I just threw in here because I'm genuinely excited to see how he's going to do versus the Mets scouting him, because that isn't going to happen. And Seiya Suzuki. Suzuki, of course, dealt with injuries early on this year. We're going to see how he matches up. He's been swinging a hot bat, just under 300 average over his past 7 games. Suzuki, 6 bombs, 26 RBIs on the year, 256 average, and over 800 OPS. And then reliever-wise, we're talking about the man that the Mets have shown interest in, and veteran David Robertson with a just over 2 ERA. When looking at ERA plus, which is very similar to OPS plus, basically tells you ERA plus, if you're at 100, per Baseball Reference, that means that you were average pitcher in baseball. David Robertson this year, he's over 200. So he's over 100% higher than what you're currently seeing with
Is that
others.
good? That sounds good, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's pretty
good.
decent. I'm not gonna lie for the veteran right-hander. So the Mets, they've already shown preliminary interest. They started scouting Robertson, and now they're gonna have them on full display and maybe, just maybe, show some more interest in Wilson Contreras than maybe what we have seen thus far to this point. So any takeaways about those players in particular? Any guys that you specifically are looking out for from the Cubs side of things in this 4-game set?
Yeah, I've got some takeaways. First off, it's funny. You saw me start to smirk a little bit when you said a guy that Mets were scouting. I thought you were going to mention David Robertson right there because the Mets are, I think, more than even Wilson Contreras. I think the Mets are scouting Robertson this series.
Yes.
But obviously, it's very realistic that if the Mets get one of them, it's going to be a package for both of them. Now, I'll be honest. I definitely want to see Contreras here. Looking at his numbers more and more, he's not my top target. Now, I know he brings the versatility of a guy who can both catch and play the DH position.
He's not my top target either. I agree.
For me, it's still Josh Bell.
Yep.
I just think that Bell's splits are through the roof. And the fact that he's also a rental, I don't think the Nationals are going to fleece us. I know we're a division rival, but at the end of the day, what's Bell going to do in August and September for a last place team? So, he's still my top target. More than Mancini, more than Contreras. But Contreras, of course, has that versatility as someone who can, like I said, catch and play DH. And then Robertson, he's the big guy for me. As far as Hap, having a fine year, going to the All-Star game, thought Nimmo was more deserving of that All-Star spot than Hap, personally. But it is what it is. Their numbers offensively are pretty even. I don't think Nimmo's stellar defense this year was really taken into account there. But Hap's a fine ball player. Suzuki's exciting. But yeah, this is all about Contreras and even more so Robertson. I'm really curious to see Robertson. In an ideal world, I'd like the Mets to shell him a little bit, inflate that ERA, make his numbers look a little less good, and hopefully knock down his trade value. But, I don't know if we'll really see Robertson in a high leverage situation because, like I said, I'm looking for 3 out of 4, maybe even a sweep here. So I don't know if we'll actually get to see Robertson in a save situation.
Let's hope we don't see Robertson.
Yeah.
Because, again, the Mets are just beating up and tattooing on this Cubs team in the 4-game set. But, yeah, that's all you guys really need to know. I don't think we need to go into complete deep dive here. This is a series the Mets are absolutely expected to win. Fingers crossed that, of course, comes to fruition and build some type of lead. Let's see the Mets start to take advantage. We have the Braves, of course, they're playing the Nationals next because, God forbid, the Braves have like back-to-back series where they're playing competent teams. But the Mets, this is a series you need to jump on. Let's increase this lead here in the NL East heading into the All-Star break, Joe.
Tyler, before we wrap it up, I want to pose a question to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mentioned earlier in the show at the very beginning, the trade deadline's a couple days later than we're accustomed to. It's usually July 31st. This year, August 2nd trade deadline. So with that said, we have time in theory. But right after the All-Star break, and again, this is our last show before the All-Star game, so I want to address this, guys. Padres-Yankees, back-to-back, 5 games in 6 days against those 2 teams. Both teams have 50-plus wins. Yanks, obviously, best record in baseball. Do the Mets, because of that schedule right out of the break, 5 games against those 2 great teams, do the Mets feel a little pressure here? And maybe right after this series in Wrigleyville, do we see Contreras and Robertson swap jerseys? Do the Mets not wait till August 2nd because of the strength of their schedule? Do they rush and make those moves sooner rather than later, in your opinion?
That's a great question. I think that's a nice segue here into our final segment. But in a nutshell, it's really just going to be indicative on the market, right? That's the biggest thing. I've heard Mets fans cry to me left and right. Why haven't the Mets addressed the bullpen? Why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? But the reality is there's a reason why no other ball club to this point has done any significant moves, especially contenders. There has been 0 to this point. Now, could we see some rumblings? Possibly. However, for the Mets' sake, while I would love to see them do a deal right after the All-Star break, and I'd have to imagine that they won't just spend their break worrying about the draft, but also worrying about continuing to scout players currently in the MLB to address this team. So we could see something. I don't think it's impossible. I just don't know the likelihood truly because the Mets are really doing their best to make sure that they don't jump on the market too early and sacrifice giving up far more assets, really biting off more than they can chew in that sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's just that, at some point, I'm a little less worried about nickel and diming what we give up in a trade, compared to the fact that, hey, the Padres, and more importantly, even though the Padres are in our league, more importantly, let's face it, because of pride, the Yanks are coming to town right after that All-Star break. And, I don't want to be running out 7, 8, 9 in our lineup looking like, J.D. Davis, Tomas Nido. I can live with one of those guys, but when the Yanks are in town, you're probably not going to be winning a game 1-0, 2-1.
It's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to treat those games like a World Series preview. Obviously the Astros, the 4-game set with them didn't go well, the 2-2 split like we have coming up with the Yankees. But we got to have some urgency, I think, for those Yankee games.
Yeah, no, I definitely think to a degree as well. And as long as the Mets don't, overstep things, which I don't expect them to, maybe we'll see at minimum one move prior to that Subway Series matchup. It's going to be very interesting to see. But to get into our final discussion on the day, and this goes in hand with what should the Mets prioritize here at the trade deadline? Like if we do our rankings, right? Because Sandy Alderson just came out. He was, I believe, with John Heyman and that being and Joel Sherman for the New York Post was on their podcast yesterday. And he broke down really what the Mets issues are right now and what they plan to prioritize. So I want to know what your reaction is to that, Joe, if you agree, disagree, and really the type of players, again, if there's anyone else that we haven't discussed yet that you may feel as a reality more versus a pipe dream. But a quote specifically from the podcast that Sandy was just on over this past day is the following, and I quote, "We've got him on the lowest DH productivity in the game. Take Pete Alonso out of it, and we're in even worse poor situation. We've been waiting all season for one or two of those players to ignite, and that hasn't happened." Obviously, he's referring to exactly J.D. Davis and Dom Smith without naming names. So what has been
without pointing fingers here, he's talking about you.
Exactly, 100%, which I don't know why they even bother. It's like, It's no different as if you have a rotation and your rotation star-studded and you have one guy that has like a completely terrible year and they say, oh, well, there's one guy in this rotation that isn't pitching to the liking that we would like to see. But going off of that tangent quick, Sandy has made it clear that DH is right at the tippity top of the list for the Mets, even a little bit more prioritized than maybe what we expected. I don't know, a month and a half ago. Bullpen is up there as well. But Joe, in your opinion, do you agree with the notion that DH is basically 1A? You could rightfully argue with the Mets and how they're trying to address things by the trade deadline, with the bullpen being right up there. Or do you think that the Mets should really prioritize pitching more than anything else? Let's hear your take.
Yeah, no. So normally 9 times out of 10, I'm saying pitching's key. Pitching wins championships. You got to prioritize pitching. In this case, though, it's not even a 1A, 1B. DH is your clear-cut biggest need, right? We're in a more offensive league than ever before now. First year of the universal DH, not counting the COVID, 2020 Pony League season. You need a DH, right? JD and Dom, these are guys just like Seth Lugo. I love them. Dom's hitting $198. Now he's put some good swings on the ball. Today hit a rocket to the gap that Acuna had him played really well defensively. But, DH is just the Mets. It wouldn't shock me if outside of, the few games that Pete DHs, if the Mets DH productivity is dead last in all of baseball. I mean, I don't have the number on that, but it wouldn't shock me at all if we're not, forget 28th, 29th, dead last in all of baseball. So DH is your clear-cut need. And I'm going to lump catcher in with that. Because the truth is, if we get Wilson Contreras, he'll be getting a lot of reps in at DH, probably only catching about a third of the games because Nido and McCann are just, you saw Nido today, threw out Acuna from his knees.
He's been on the money lately.
And he's the best base stealer in baseball. The guy's already got, 17 stolen bases, and he's played like a half a season. Mm-hmm. So Tomas Nido, even better than McCann defensively. The two of them are studs defensively, and I need to emphasize that. Because obviously we know that sometimes what they bring to the table offensively is a little lacking. So I lump Contreras in that DH discussion. DH, clear-cut top need, followed by bullpen. And then, as I mentioned, because of how solid David Peterson's been and really showing he is a major league starter, and he's really not a number 5 starter. If he could just go a little deeper into games on average, this is a guy who is a middle-of-the-rotation guy, a 3 or even a high-end 4. And so because of that, it would go DH, bullpen, and then starting pitching on my biggest need power rankings.
And I think we're around the same wavelength. For me personally, I think I have bullpen at number 1 for the sole purpose that bullpen is the thing that I think could bite the Mets in the ass most come playoff time. I think that they could have more issues versus, say, having one glaring hole in their lineup if they get productivity from the catching position. Now, if they don't, which I kind of don't expect them to, then we're looking at minimum 2. 7 out of the 9 for the lineups looking strong, otherwise not too hot. But bullpen has just been a continued problem for this Mets team, where home run rate again, I know that they played the Braves, so I'm not trying to view this as the Braves are every team that they're playing. But even when they aren't playing the Braves, it doesn't matter who they're matching up with. We are here and really wondering how much of length we are going to get from this bullpen on an everyday basis. I mean, God forbid that the Mets get consistency at that position, because there's been so Jekyll and Hyde. The Mets had a horrendous month of June with the bullpen. And here in July, it hasn't been anything drastically better either when looking at home run rates are consistently up still. And I really need the Mets to address this bullpen. I think that is probably my 1A. Then my 1B, which I would have right there, is DH/catcher position. I think that's huge as well. I mean, for the most part, again, we're on the same terms here, but the DH especially, we all know the Mets want to address it. I'm excited that it's been already discussed from Sandy and widely reported that the Mets are going in on this, because this is something where it felt like maybe in years past where maybe the Mets do not do enough in that one spot that definitely could be needed. However, I feel confident in the notion that the Mets are going to address every single one of the holes they currently have in this lineup. Now, again, the biggest question is addressing is one thing, to what degree is the other? And that is going to be the big question, the big if you will, as we get closer to this trade deadline. And then all the way at the bottom of my totem pole, I know it's a surprise because I was the complete opposite for a while, is starting pitching. It goes directly in hand with what we've seen now. And I said, if Max Scherzer comes out guns a-blazing, if David Pearson provides production, if Trevor Williams provides quality depth, it's hard to argue that the Mets should be all in on the sense of a Luis Castillo, a Frankie Montas, guys that are going to cost you an arm and a leg when you don't necessarily need to do that and can focus more in the avenues that are best fit for your team right now. And it's hard to argue that best fit is not the likes of addressing bullpen DH/catcher. So I'm excited. I fully expect them to address every area of need. It's just going to be that big question mark, to what degree, right? Are they going to go out and get themselves the best bat available? Is it going to be a Josh Bell? Or are they going to be lower on the tone pole and maybe go after a Charlie Blackmon or a Brandon Drury, who has thrived, for instance, with the Reds, one-time Met, maybe comes back to Queens, right? Are they going to add more than one bat? These are all questions I'm so excited to find out. And all I know is that as we get closer to the trade deadline, these assumptions, these rumors will, by all means, become more of a reality.
Yeah, and I'll say this is my final remark on this topic, and then on the show ultimately. The reason for me that DH is more pressing than bullpen, and I agree, for the regular season, for this divisional race with Atlanta, we definitely need bullpen help. But at the end of the day, and maybe one of my faults is that I look too far ahead too often, looking ahead to the playoffs, at the end of the day, I trust a core. In the playoffs, don't forget, your fifth, sixth, seventh relievers, they're seldom used. And I'm going to say this, starters become relievers in the postseason. So I'm looking at, even though, although honestly, I think when McGill comes back, I think he might, if everyone's healthy, McGill might just be back as a reliever this year.
I think he's going to be,
Yeah, so I'm looking at McGill as a bullpen option. I'm looking at right now our core four of Diaz, Ottavino, Holderman, and Drew Smith, not even counting Medina, who I would rather see on the postseason roster as a bullpen arm than Lugo. Trevor May is on his way back from injury. Carrasco, Peterson might be in the bullpen. I'm not even mentioning Lugo or Joely Rodriguez. So it's like, to me, at the end of the day, we're gonna, in a playoff format with a playoff, a playoff built roster, we're going to have relievers. Are you going to have offense? Are you going to have a DH who can go up against Judge, Stanton, Alvarez? The Dodgers' endless slew of bats, right? So at the end of the day, I know that, the Mets might need bullpen help right now, and I'm probably looking too far ahead in that respect. But I think when October rolls around and you're working with a four-man starting rotation, the thought of Peterson probably pumping 97 out of the pen, or McGill pumping 99 out of the pen, like those are pretty sexy thoughts to me right now.
They are, and that's a great point. When I was evaluating bullpen, I still, again, think it's at the tip of the top of the Mets list along with DH. I wasn't really thinking, in that moment at least, the impact that starters will have in the pen. So that's a great point, and that honestly changes my perspective slightly, where I'm more in agreement with you that maybe that bat is just the main thing the Mets need to get, and then bullpen right behind it. and then go on from there. But with that being said, Joe, unless you have any final remarks, I think that's going to wrap it up here for episode 6 of Bleav in Queens, guys. We thank you so much for watching or listening. If you're here on YouTube on WardyNYM, the YouTube channel, please don't hesitate once more from smashing that like and subscribe button. It's always greatly appreciated, folks. Trust me, we are having an absolute blast here presented by the Bleav Network. And we're so excited because it looks like we are an episode or so away from having our third co-host being a former New York Met. So get ready for that announcement. It's coming very, very soon. So yeah, well, I know we've been talking about it. We've been hinting at it for a while, but there's a reason for that. Cannot wait for that to come in full fruition. You see him here on the show, guys. But outside of that, make sure you rate, review wherever you get your podcast as well, especially on audio. I know that you guys maybe aren't aware of us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast overall. Make sure to check them out there if you aren't listening here on the video version, or if you want to maybe make sure that you watch, and you can't watch if you want to hear it on the audio version on your trip to work or whatever you're doing. Make sure to do exactly that. And again, follow me on Twitter at WardyNYM. Greatly appreciate it. And Joe, where can everyone find you?
Catch me on Instagram at Joe Serralo, on Twitter and TikTok at the Joe Serralo. Every Thursday, don't forget, 7 p.m. Eastern. I Bleav, by now, when this episode drops, it's already Thursday. So 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Catch my weekly national radio show, Serralo Sports Talk, on Sports Map Radio. And the last remark I'll make, because, I obviously am a big sports bettor. I give out picks on my socials every day. So, if you follow me on Twitter at the Joe Serralo, you'll see daily winners. What am I? 27-5. 32 picks in the month of July. I'm 27-5 this month.
Not bad.
Max Scherzer against the Cubs, 10 starts. He's 5-2, 89 strikeouts in 10 starts. 9 Ks per game. He's gone 8 or more in his last 4. So if Scherzer's line is 7.5, hammer that against Chicago this weekend.
I will even go a step further to say that if you do not have that minimum 9, it would kind of be silly. I think that really Scherzer is going to strike out a bunch of those Cubs. Wishful thinking, no less. But
yeah, they're a bottom 10 strikeout team in baseball, Chicago. Bottom 10, in terms of having one of the 10 worst K rates.
Yes.
So I think that's going to play to Max's advantage. I Bleav that's Saturday he goes up against them.
Yes, it is. That's going to be awesome. I can't wait, guys. Make sure to check out Joe with his picks on his Twitter, as always. And again, thank you all once more for listening. This was episode 6 of Bleav in Queens, and we will see you all later next week to preview the upcoming Padres series. Have a great one, folks. Let's go Mets.